Operation Vala Umgodi has grabbed the headlines, hasn't it? The nation's attention. But who are the Zama Zamas? Are they all foreigners here illegally? Are they all criminals? How many are duped into it? Who runs these syndicates? And how connected are they to the powerful? And most importantly, how do we put a stop to this? We're joined now by somebody who has been on the ground, who's interviewed a lot of the Zama Zamas, who understands how this illicit economy works and the networks. Listen to a paragraph he wrote. When Zama Zamas go hungry deep underground in the abandoned mines where they illegally mine for gold, they sometimes resort to eating a mixture of toothpaste and toilet paper. You mix a soft porridge with water, one of the miners said, miming his belly becoming full. It hurts to swallow, but your hunger stops for a while. Kimon de Greef joins us now from Ground Up. Ground Up, of course, is a non-profit news agency that tells community-driven stories. And we just thought, because of their in-depth journalism, let's speak to them and get an A to Z, if you will, of who the Zama Zamas are. Kimon, a very good morning to you, and thank you for talking to us on 7:02 Breakfast.
Hi there. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So your work on this issue has certainly, for me, been eye-opening because I think you drill into the faces of this problem.
Yeah, well, thank you. It is an issue that I've been interested in for quite some time, and it's one that's very complicated. So every now and then it bursts into the news when something terrible happens, and then it sort of subsides. And in between those news events is an industry that runs more or less uninterrupted, and that has been quite difficult to get to grips with and understand, like the deeper dynamics that allow it to continue operating, I suppose.
I think one of the issues that I've noticed for a while is that it's a problem that has long been ignored, has it not? There are many communities who will tell you about how they've been terrorized by the illegal miners. There have been accusations of criminal activity around not only what they do, but in those communities. And it's just one of those that the authorities haven't responded, I think, with the appropriate urgency to deal with. And now it's kind of exploding all in our faces.
Yeah, so it's absolutely true that the Zama Zama economy tends to be extremely violent, and that impoverished communities in mine towns that no longer have functioning legal gold mining industries bear the brunt of that violence. It's also true that Zama Zama activity, even though it's underground and below the surface and illegal, generates a large amount of cash that makes its way into local economies. So it's complex. People in towns where Zama Zama activity is rampant both are confronted by violence, but also have money going into local spaza shops or renting accommodation, buying cars from car dealers. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and to me it points that to the root, one of the root problems here, which is that there are many areas in South Africa that once had mining industries and now have a kind of hole in their economies that this is filling for all the problems that come with it.
Have we spoken enough about many of those mining companies who don't rehabilitate those mines once they're no longer profitable, once they cease operations, thus allowing for the Zama Zamas to move in?
Absolutely. So it's a requirement to close a mine that a company is supposed to get signed off on rehabilitation. They're supposed to fill up the shafts. They're supposed to make it impossible to get down into these tunnels. South Africa has the deepest gold mines in the world, and so you can have a vertical shaft that drops for 2 kilometers or further. And just from a health and safety perspective, it's kind of insane to think of those holes still being there.
But
what
even
complicates it,
yeah.
Well, I was going to just add what complicates it is that in Stilfontein, for example, where this current crisis is unfolding, many of the abandoned shafts were indeed capped and sealed off, only to be blown open by Zama Zamas who are determined to get underground. Another factor that complicates this is that mines are bought and sold many times over. And so the buck has kind of gotten passed down, where a company can buy a mine that has, been largely depleted, and they can cut costs and they can get some more gold out, or maybe the gold price goes up and it becomes profitable to go back down, and then they can sell it off. And that process can repeat several times until it's sort of unclear where the responsibility lies. And I don't think that the South African government has done enough to ensure that these sites are properly rehabilitated. So to properly rehabilitate a shaft actually means filling the entire, just putting a concrete cap on the top. But that's incredibly expensive, and companies who are operating in these mines where most of the gold is worked out and it's increasingly expensive to get it out, don't have a huge financial incentive to do something so costly as fill up an entire shaft. And so that's how we end up in the situation with, hundreds of abandoned shafts nationally where Zamas are able to enter.
Kimon, one of the things you write about is you try and paint a picture of the economy around Zama Zamas, and particularly what happens underground. For example, you write about how even a bottle of water could be sold for 100 Rand. A six-pack of beer could cost up to 1,500 Rand. And there are all sorts of goods that Zama Zamas will need underground, from torches and the batteries to light those torches. Of course, things like cigarettes and even medication. All of those come at a premium in order to be able to supply those who are underground. How does something like that develop without anyone, quote unquote, noticing? And from your experience, who are the Zama Zamas?
Well, to the first point, I don't think it's the case that nobody notices. I think it's fairly well established, and people in the communities where this is happening know exactly where food is being packaged, where it's being dropped. We're talking about sometimes thousands of men living underground, and they can remain down there for months and sometimes years at a time. And so there's an enormously complex logistical operation required to get them the supplies that they need to survive. Because it's a known doesn't necessarily mean that people do things about it. There's a ton of corruption that surrounds this economy. It generates a huge amount of money. So some of that money makes its way into, unfortunately, the pockets of people who are supposed to be clamping down on the problem. As for who the Zama Zamas are, there's a number of ways to answer that question. Most illegal miners who are arrested are from Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Mozambique. However, there are also South Africans who are involved in the trade. And another way of answering it is, who are Zama Zamas? Is there are people, young men, almost exclusively, who have found it worthwhile, or maybe they're too desperate, to venture down into these nightmarish tunnels where it's 40 degrees or hotter, it's extremely humid, the tunnels have caved in, there's armed gangs defending turf underground. And so there are people taking some of the most unimaginable risks in the world. And then a third answer is that some of them are people who are tricked or forced into this work. So they may be recruited somewhere in rural Lesotho as of paid work in South Africa, be brought here, be fed, run up a bill with whoever's bringing them in as a kind of labor broker, only to be led to the mouth of an abandoned shaft and told to either climb down or that they're going to be lowered by a rope. I don't know what proportion of the Zama Zamas are these kind of people that I'm describing, but it definitely happens. Many others are just doing it because they see it as the only way for them to make a good living and to earn the kind of money that our society doesn't otherwise offer them.
Certainly at Stilfontein, so far from what we're being told by authorities, the majority of those who've been arrested after emerging are foreign nationals. But then if, as one might imagine, they are deported, doesn't it lead to the problem that they'll be back the week after, the month after, or at least sometime down the road? And really what I'm asking you is, are operations like Vala Umgodi, Close the Hole, is this the way to solve this problem?
I don't think so. So what Vala Umgodi is doing in Stilfontein is they've sent in the military and they've sent in police from far away from Stilfontein I think the thinking being that they are less likely to be tainted by, corruption, to put it plainly. And it's enormously expensive to have them there. They've got them stationed at every single entrance to the tunnel networks. That's shafts and ventilation shafts. It's like dozens of holes in the ground. That can't be sustained forever. And when they leave, there is still going to be gold underground. There's still going to be a labor pool willing to get it. Many of the people who get deported are going to find their way back, as you correctly point out. And I don't think that just sealing off the entrances to one town ultimately fixes things when these kind of deeper structural dynamics remain in place. That said, this operation is working right now, and from the perspective of police who are there to make arrests and we seem to be doing something about a problem, I would think that they consider this a very successful operation. I just don't know if it's a long-term solution.
Gosh, Kimon de Greef, appreciate your time. Kimon de Greef is a ground-up freelance journalist and author. He also writes for The New Yorker. Of course, as you know, Ground Up is a non-profit news agency telling community-driven stories, and they rely on donations to deliver in-depth journalism without ads or paywall. If you'd like to support their critical work, simply go to groundup.org.za for details.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.